views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, we have a very big show today. We're talking class actions. Restaurant industry trying to get their restaurants open to at least 50%, if not a larger capacity. Class actions, teachers not having to go into the classrooms. We're going to have two very important guests on to discuss it. Also, we're going to discuss a little bit about my latest interview on the Open Show with Daren Jaime. As you can see, we have a lot to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Very, very important topic has been coming up throughout New York City, and that's the restaurants opening at some point, full capacity. It's been debated more than you can imagine, and we're lucky, very lucky, to have James Mermigis here. James represents the plaintiffs in a class action. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Busy as usual, but I'm doing well.
Well, busy's good. Busy's better than not being busy. Listen, I'm a big foodie. Love the food. I'm on the Upper East Side. I've been eating mostly outdoors, not indoors. Tell me what's going on with respect to indoor dining. Let's get the viewers up to speed if we could.
Okay. We filed an initial lawsuit on behalf of Il Bacco Restaurant, which is in the border of Queens and Nassau County. That restaurant, it's a landmark in Queens, and 500 feet east, you're allowed to have indoor dining, but Il Bacco cannot have indoor dining. Il Bacco was relegated to a rooftop of 60 seating capacity, and the 315 or so indoor seats were not used. But if you went 500 feet east in Great Neck, New York, you could enjoy indoor dining. So that they were our first plaintiff, and that lawsuit now is up to 750 to 800 restaurants. A week or so later, I filed another class action for indoor dining in Staten Island. And again, Staten Island is pretty suburban. We filed another class action, Staten Island. The restaurant, the lead plaintiff is Baselli's Restaurant. It's on Highland Boulevard. Highland Boulevard is a middle-class suburban neighborhood, no different than a neighborhood in Nassau County or Westchester County or Suffolk County, yet they were also relegated to outdoor dining where they had a 60-person seating capacity. Now, all these restaurants are dying. They're losing money every day, and most of them are dipping into their own personal assets and funds to stay afloat, but they cannot stay afloat any longer. There's only so much you could dip into your assets. A lot of these restaurants have tremendous rent overhead. Right now, Governor Cuomo has a freeze on all evictions, but what's going to happen when that's lifted? And all these restaurants in New York City that are operating now, the day after I filed the Staten Island lawsuit, the governor announced that New York City could resume at 25% capacity starting September 30th. While that's very generous of the governor, that's not enough. None of these restaurants can survive on 25% indoor capacity. Just this weekend now, it's going to be in the 40s at night. Okay. People don't like to eat in the cold. And what we're still want is we want the 50% indoor capacity. Just like any other restaurant in the state of New York, we feel that we are being treated unfairly because we're only allowed 25%, while Yonkers, Albany, Buffalo, Rochester, they can have 50% indoor capacity. And that's what we're looking. We're looking to get the same capacity as the rest of the state.
I grew up in Queens Village. I understand that border there, that Nassau County Lake Success kind of border. restaurants on one side and the other side, it is a little ridiculous. It's, in the law, as we would say, arbitrary and capricious, right? What guarantees, or what can your plaintiffs possibly do to guarantee or attempt to really protect the safety of its patrons, to force the governor to expand to 50% at least?
Okay, listen. Our plaintiffs are prepared to offer the same CDC guidelines for safety as every other restaurant in the state of New York. Okay? Our plaintiffs feel that 50% in Queens is no different than 50% indoor in Westchester or Rockland or Putnam County or any of these counties. 50% is 50%. You have the same amount of people in each restaurant, percentage of people. So we're ready to abide by every CDC guidelines, the same as every other restaurant in the state of New York. We're ready to do that. So our argument is, why New York City? Why is New York City being treated differently when the infection rates of New York City now are lower than Westchester and Long Island? So especially Manhattan. The other day I saw Manhattan, there was like 8,600 tests for COVID, and there were only 51 positives. It was like a 0.5 or 0.6%. Almost half of 1% are testing positive.
The lawsuit itself, it's been filed. Are you getting any kind of indication that it's having an effect? More of a dialogue that's coming up, or that's coming out by anybody else? Because sometimes that's what has to grease the wheel. You file a lawsuit, people start, let me respond, let me figure this out.
Yeah.
Is it helping?
Well, listen, I'll tell you one thing. I do believe that we hadn't filed the lawsuit for the gyms would still be closed today. The governor, I know he's got a very tough job. I'm not, in any way belittling any of his job. He's got a very, very tough job. But, it's time when the infection rates are under 1% in New York State for over 30 days, 38 days, I believe he said yesterday, it's time to slowly open up every business, because who's going to compensate these businesses? There are so many small businesses that are going out of business. So if you couple that with the unemployment rates, I mean, we're at the edge here. We're looking at a catastrophic economy coming forward. So I do believe the gym lawsuit was definitely responsible for opening up the gyms, because he opened up the gyms 4 days before we were supposed to have a hearing. So, and he never responded to our papers. So in lieu of responding to our papers, he opened up the gyms. And I'm hopeful we could do the same thing for indoor dining.
Do you know when you're going to hear next from either the courts?
I'm actually filing an injunction today.
Wow. Okay.
And I should have a hearing next week. So that I'm going to put everything on, speed dial and try to get the hearing by the end of next week. And then hopefully the state will either respond or allow New York City restaurants to operate at 50%. One more thing that's very important here. The New York City restaurants have the highest overhead, the biggest rent, the highest overhead. Okay. And they're at 25%. Meanwhile, a restaurant up in Rochester, which is probably, 15% of the rent that they pay in New York City, is operating at 50%. So that's not fair, and it's not right. And I know a lot of restaurants that don't have the outdoor dining now that will not open at 25% because they're going to lose money. So it's not worth it for them to open.
Well, good luck with the injunction today. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks you can come back, let us know what happened, and we'll see if we move to 50%. But again, thanks for coming on, James.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. All right. Well, so recently I was just interviewed on the opening show with Daren Jaime. I was able to discuss a little bit about the recent class action of the teachers against the Board of Education. Let's take a look.
New York City teachers and unions are fighting to keep schools closed and teachers at home nationwide. Teachers are nervous about getting back into the classroom, citing health and safety concerns as the COVID-19 pandemic stretches into a new school year on September the 1st. A new lawsuit was filed suing the country's largest school district to give every teacher the right to work remotely if they choose. What legal criteria can be met in order to ensure the safety of educators and students for this upcoming school year? Joining us now to share a little bit more and provide some further insight is the attorney and host of today's verdict, my brother and friend, David Lesch. And good to have you, David.
Darren, always great to see you. You know, as an attorney, you usually don't see too many new issues that come up. It can be a little exciting, at least for me, whether there's issues about vaccination or issues about school and standard of care. Certainly, this one is a new one. It's basically 5 teachers who are really heading a class action in New York City, bringing in action, forcing New York City to justify why they have to go to work and why they can't work remotely. And they're basically, these 5 teachers who are leading the litigation are arguing in the lawsuit. This is really a Hobson's choice. In other words, if we don't go into school and we lose our job as a teacher, then we can feed our families and there's an economic hardship. If we do go into school and we teach the class, there is a potential for harm to our physical bodies, and therefore somebody in our family could have, you know, dire consequences and unfortunately pass away. So we lose either way. The only way we can win is if we're able to stay at home and teach remotely. However, the City of New York Board of Education says, well, you do not meet the CNC guidelines for the ability to work from home. Therefore, you must still go in. Teachers say, hey, we have to take public transportation. That in itself is a risk. We don't know, you know, the type of setting that we're going into. We don't know exactly how it's being sanitized. We haven't been given enough information, so we believe that we've been put at harm, and that's why we are bringing this lawsuit to either force you to allow us to work remotely, or in the alternative, if we are harmed as a result of going in, there's going to be some type of damages. Could be, you know, just a regular civil lawsuit, and that may end up having to go before a jury, which, you know, I'll talk to you in a second about, I think, the elements and things that you would have to prove. Again, it's all new and particularly fascinating for anybody in my field.
Yeah, but when we talk about teachers actually filing this, you said there's a few more expected to actually join in and get this kind of momentum. Let's talk about threshold, because when we remember, the governor put several thresholds out there, particularly for nursing homes, houses of worship, places like that, and increased the thresholds so high. What are we going to see legally when it comes to teachers as well as schools?
Well, you know, again, it's political, as it always is, and that's why, you know, rolled into the bill, you know, in Congress, in terms of trying to get the extra money for those who are on unemployment, is, you know, liability protections for hospitals, nursing homes, and of course schools, which Democrats don't necessarily want to, you know, to give as well, because they want to be able to hold certain institutions responsible if they aren't at least meeting certain, as you said, certain thresholds, certain criteria. So think about it from, you know, the Department of Education standpoint here. You know, well, you know, what more can we do? You know, we're doing all the protections we can, and, you know, children have to be able to go to school. That's the only way they can learn. They're our future. You know, we need you in school to protect them. The teachers are like, wait a second. You know, what about, you know, courthouses? There's no foot traffic in courthouses. That's not particularly fair. You know, you're protecting judges, you're protecting lawyers, but you're not protecting teachers. Well, it's really, you know, that's really not particularly fair to our class. Our class are teachers, and more are going to join the class. So you're going to say, well, what's the threshold here? Well, let's say this lawsuit ends up going to trial for whatever reason, or at least there's litigated on papers. Well, you have to show so many different things. First of all, there's the burden of proof. How much, the standard of care. Think about that. What's, you know, as an attorney, you're always arguing, well, they did not meet their standard of care. whether it's an automobile accident or a ceiling collapse, what's the standard of care that has to be provided to you? Well, what's the standard of care that the Board of Education, the City of New York, has to provide? What's the level that they have to provide in terms of distancing, cleaning? Nobody knows, because nobody really knows exactly, how much care they have to provide to you. The scientific evidence isn't there yet. We didn't know what the standard of care to give in terms of nursing home residents, and then, Governor Cuomo is giving a lot of heat now in terms of transferring to the nursing homes. But at the time, we didn't know what the standard of care. Do we really know what the standard of care is now with respect to teachers? We don't. So that can change.
I want to talk a little bit more about another topic of discussion. We talk about legalities. Let's talk about the vaccine. We hear that the vaccine is making its way, and hopefully it will land in the lives of people pretty soon. But still, there's some legal concerns with regards to the vaccine. If a person is actually hurt, let's talk about that. Say, for instance, the vaccine
Well,
there's going to be some legal ramifications with that too. So walk us through what you're hearing right now, because even though we're hearing about the vaccine, let's talk about some of the legal ramifications, because we know that's also in part why it takes so long for it to come across the desk.
The vaccination law has been around since, from my research shows, back in almost in 1905. It's been around for a long time, when our country was trying to force people to be vaccinated against smallpox. A lot of people didn't want to take the vaccine, and some people said that it actually harmed them when they took the vaccine. And the courts were a little wishy-washy as to what to do about it. But that particular area of the law has been growing. People do get hurt by vaccines. It is a fact. Now, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. It could be how the vaccine is administered, where the needle is put into the body, or the actual vaccination itself, whether it's harmful to you. There are attorneys who specialize in this. So the question is going to be, well, what is going to be the standard of care here? Is it that you were negligent in terms of the creation of the vaccination? Were you grossly negligent? We've been watching the news. I'm sure, you see it as well. They stopped one of the trials because a woman apparently developed some type of issue with respect to an inflammation in her spinal cord. Well, if this vaccine went to market and now many people end up having the same issue to their back, well, is that reckless now? Gross negligence? You had noticed that this happened to one woman and maybe in other people too, and you still let it go on the market? Again, issues we're not sure about yet. Burden of proof, what's it going to be? Will there be a blanket immunity? And this is very interesting, because this now, Daren, this relates to the schools. What if next year they say you can't put your child in class unless you show that the child was vaccinated? And the parent says, I don't trust the vaccination. The Board of Education says, well, that's fine, but we're not offering remote learning anymore. We expect children to come in. If you don't get vaccinated, your child's not vaccinated, you can't get an education. Well, I'm sure there'll be a lawsuit for that. So the question is, so does the vaccination hurt you? Can you sue for that? And if you don't get vaccinated, can you sue because you're prevented from getting some of the, some of the benefits that society gives you, like an education? All still unsettled. And, this is, again, a whole legal area that I'm sure we'll be discussing for at least a year, if not years to come.
Yeah. In our remaining couple of minutes, let me just get here and talk about what's going on in regards to the court system. We know the court has remained open, but when we talk about jury trials, that is not actually taking place yet. So give us an update as to how things are transpiring in the court system right now.
Sure. Well, I'll give you the scoop. It looks like, from what I hear from the Bar Association and the people that are in the know, there will not be any attorneys returning to certainly Bronx County Court till at least January. That's a given. So let's say once the attorneys go back, which should happen right around that time, well, what about jury trials? I mean, that's really, what the next step. That will be even longer. Maybe the summer, if there's a vaccination, because to ask jurors to cram together in a jury box, it's a very difficult thing to do, especially on a civil case as opposed to a criminal case where you really are determining a person's right to freedom. So with respect to a civil case, I don't see jurors until at least the summer. Attorneys, they should start getting ready by January. That's from what I hear. But in the meantime, and I've told you this off camera, I'm very busy in my office. I have depositions all week long, virtual conferences with the court. I'm still meeting clients in my office, when I can. But foot traffic in the courthouse, not yet. Although judges do have to be in, clerks as well, at least a certain amount of them, but no lawyers yet. I don't see that happening until January. So this whole remote learning for attorneys, it's going to continue.
All right, DL, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much. Listen, best wishes, stay safe. And of course, as these issues continue to come before us, we'll bring you back so that way you can hash it out for us. David Lesch, our guest. Thanks much.
It's always my pleasure. Stay healthy, stay well, stay Bronx strong.
You too, DL.
Well, recently, there's been a class action filed against the Board of Education by a group of teachers who believe that it's still unsafe to return to the classrooms. We're lucky to have with us today Lydia Howrilka from the Solidarity Caucus to discuss it. Lydia, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get into the lawsuit. It looks like the gloves are off. Last time we were discussing it, we weren't sure what was really going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The time has come. Mayor de Blasio wants the kids back in school. No matter how it works, someone's not going to be happy, and it looks like the teachers are not happy. Tell us a little bit about the lawsuit that's recently been filed, if you could.
Sure. So a number of our members had been unable to apply for medical accommodations. The DOE has an old system called SOLAS, which is very cantankerous on the best of times, and it has been giving a lot of our members issues. A number of our members who have elderly parents, children who are very sick, childcare issues, they were unable to apply for medical accommodation. I also had colleagues who had very severe issues of their own health-wise, and the DOE denied them repeatedly.
Well, let's break it up for a second. Let's start with the teachers who have their own pre-existing condition.
Mm-hmm.
What do they have to show for them to be able to opt out and be able to do remote learning?
A doctor's note. And the issue is that a lot of the doctor's notes weren't being accepted by SOLAS and by the DOE.
Why is that? The doctors aren't board certified. What's the rationale to not accepting a doctor's note that says that a particular teacher has a pre-existing condition that makes he or she more at risk?
Truly, I think it's just the DOE's way of trying to control as to how many teachers can apply for remote, because I think the DOE knows that if they accept everybody, the system will more or less really tip towards the scale of going fully remote, at least for like the fall semester.
Have teachers been able to appeal that decision?
Some have, others have not.
All right. Have the ones that have been able to appeal been successful, and did they have to produce other doctor notes or hospital notes?
Ones who've been able to successfully appeal have either retained an attorney, my attorney, for instance, and also others have simply just had their doctor write a more detailed medical note.
Now, let's go into the second part. And those are individuals who are in fine health, but they're living with somebody who has a pre-existing condition and is very much at risk. Mm-hmm. They don't have a chance, though. Am I correct?
No, we don't have a chance. So I live with my mother, who is 73 years old and elderly and very sick. And I do not have a chance at applying for a medical accommodation because the DO would say, well, it's your mother who has the issue. You're fine. You can go live in your basement. You can go move into a hotel. You don't have to live with your mother, even though, my mom needs me. My mom cannot run a house by herself. And I know a lot of my other colleagues are in the same boat. Some of them are the primary caregiver of their elderly grandparent or parent or even child.
Does the lawsuit address that particular element?
It does.
And do you think it's going to be successful in any way?
Yes. It has been successful for several of our petitioners.
And again, I would assume that, doctor's notes and history of medical infirmity for the relatives that you're living with must be shown to the Department of Education.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're in a new phase, right? And we have this class action and the lawsuit's pending. Do you feel that there's been adequate pressure put on our our local government to possibly change the system as it is, where it's only partly remote, partly in person, forcing teachers to come in? Or tell me where you think we're going with this.
I definitely have noticed that there has been a slight sea change, at least over the past day or two. I remember that my attorney was sitting me down before all our arguments started on Friday, and he said, you know as well as I do that the DOE is looking very closely at this, and they will have their lawyers sitting in on the oral arguments over Skype. And true enough, there were people whose numbers I did not recognize. I do not know what they were affiliated with, but I do know that the DOE is working very closely with the Corporation Counsel on this case, and that they are very near.
Now, Lydia, is there anything that the Department of Education can do to make your members feel better with respect to actually going into the classrooms? In other words, is there any type of mechanism, cleaning, whatever it takes, to make your members comfortable actually going in there and teaching in person?
At this point, considering COVID is still a major threat and considering there's still a ban on large gatherings, we know that COVID spreads like wildfire in indoor places with very poor ventilation. I mean, my colleagues are telling me that propping open a window 2 inches is considered by the DOE a properly ventilated room. On what reality is that ever the case? But only in the DOE, right? Only in the DOE would a 2-inch propped up window, one window in a huge classroom, be considered properly ventilated. The DOE needs to seriously get into grips with reality. They need to properly fund our schools. Our schools are not properly funded. My school only has 2 custodians in the day, and we have a 4-floor building. That is not enough manpower to clean a building even with a reduced number of students and faculty members. It is still not enough. Schools need to be fully funded. And I truly stand by my idea that we should not have any in-person classes, at least for the first couple of months, and then we can play it by ear as we get closer to getting a vaccine, and once the governor lifts bans on large gatherings. If we cannot assemble for a Mets game, if people cannot watch their friends and family on Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune, what makes you think it's safe for kids who take public transportation, faculty who take public transportation, to congregate in schools?
Well, Lydia Howrilka, we will leave it there. Hopefully you'll come back in the next couple of weeks. We'll see where we're heading. Unfortunately, it looks like the coronavirus is going to be with us for a while. Yes. And I'm sure you and your members are going to have a lot more to say. Yes. Again, thanks. All right, we'll be back with some more Today's Verdict. Stay with us right after this. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have any questions or you want to see a topic on a future show, just email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until then, remember, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you next time.